Welcome to Shawn and Carter Have a Podcast. My name is Shawn.
And I'm Carter.
And Carter, you sent me something recently, a piece of pop music set to an interesting YouTube video.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw it, I skipped through it, and I was like, and in the message you were like, I don't know if you've already seen this. And I was trying to figure out why in the world you'd think I might have already seen it. And it turns out it's because it's kind of a popular thing that apparently I am very in the dark about. Who is this Carly Rae Jepsen?
Yeah, you weren't on the Call Me Maybe. You hadn't been infected by that virus.
I did not get on the Call Me Maybe train.
You did not get on the Call Me Maybe train or the Carly Rae Jepsen train.
In fact, I called it what? Gross pop music?
Yeah, it's sickly sweet. Although it sticks with you. It sticks with you.
I did not even listen to the whole song, and when I woke up the next morning, parts of it were in my head, and I was like, what is going on?
I incepted you.
You got into my dreams.
Yeah. We'll make sure that the video that I sent Shawn is in the links, on the YouTube video. This song has been incredibly, it's been covered all over YouTube. Like every single person has done their own little version of Call Me Maybe.
There are plenty of celebrities in there, even on like a crappy cell phone recording. There's like James Franco and Katy Perry, and you're like, what?
Justin Bieber and Selena Gomez.
I read about that one when I finally read about the song, because basically they are responsible for its popularity.
Yes. Carly Rae Jepsen is a largely unknown pop singer in Canada, I believe, which makes sense.
That's probably why she's not well known.
Right. Well, sorry, Canada. And yeah, this thing blew up, and there's a video that the video I'm referencing. There's like, what would you say, 50 different YouTube videos worth of covers?
Probably even more, actually.
Maybe more.
It's every line it changes to a new cover or to a new person.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things was that was sort of out there was the Harvard baseball team did this sort of like total deadpan, like they're in their van going to like game or something, just like kind of like little routine to it. So not only did they do that, but then like another team, it was a girls it was a swimming team. They did their own version of that, but like upside down. And then Kathy Lee and Hoda on Today, the fourth hour of Today, did that as well, which is just hysterical. It just shows like how not just the song, but like this kind of interaction has really this song has been kind of like a focal point for all of that.
It's gone through so many different levels of reinterpretation.
Yeah, I just thought it was great. It was sort of it's like the fan edit or whatever of Star Wars. Like every 15 seconds has been like. So I just thought it was great, and the song is I think we decided that we may talk about it more on a future podcast, but it's just like a perfect pop song. It's
one of those harmless bubblegum pop kind of songs.
Right. It's 3 minutes long. It's like there are absolutely no flaws in the song. That one, obviously it's not taking any risks, but two, it's just it's got like the catchiest hook of any song of this year, and it's upbeat and I hear it at least once a day in my office.
I anticipate the day when I am hearing it at least twice a day at work. It will happen.
Yes, it will.
I'm a fan of pop music, but there's a certain line of how many times I can listen to a song before I'm like, this song should die.
Yeah, I go through that. I go through that with songs and with food. Like the food that I eat every day. Yeah. I get burnt. I have been burnt out on Chinese. I ate Chinese for a really long time. This in the past like 6 months, and I haven't had Chinese food in months now because I'm just like, I don't want any more of that. Get it out of my sight. I want Mexican food. All right, so we got a little bit of follow up before we get to our main topic. We haven't had a big main topic in a couple weeks, I feel, and we have sort of the larger main topic, kind of getting back to our old format. And the first piece of follow-up that I have is, I just wanted to mention this. I already mentioned it to Shawn, but if you know the sex advice columnist for thestranger.com and podcast host Dan Savage, you probably have a feeling about him. You probably love him or you hate him. I happen to love him, and I got retweeted by him, which was just amazing. And I was like, it's so cool.
I love those little moments.
Right? Because you can Twitter is so amazing because it can make that stuff happen. And no other medium could do that, really.
And it may seem like the smallest amount of interaction to that guy, but to the person who is receiving it, it might be like a huge, like, wow, that made my day.
Right. He clicked the retweet button. That's all he did. Didn't have to do it. And then I get this email that says, Dan Savage retweeted your tweet to, blah, blah, whatever, tens of thousands of people. And I'm just like, I immediately emailed it to, to my friends who like Dan Savage. And I was like, look what happened!
Yeah, the exact same thing happened to me when Kevin Smith favorited my tweet. It emailed me. It was like, that Kevin Smith favorited your tweet. And I was like, he did? He likes me.
I don't see Twitter. Twitter's is great for that. That's one of the reasons why I just love Twitter and prefer it greatly to Facebook or other.
It puts you all on a level playing field, and you can like actually reach all those famous people who are normally behind like a PR person, behind an agent, behind a manager, behind a people that you can't reach.
Right, you couldn't like call those people, or send them a letter, right? People send letters to, or used to send letters to celebrities, and it's like, well, maybe they'll read them, but they're definitely not going to take the time to write something back, because that's total pain. But just click a button, you can do that. They can totally do that, and he did. Thank you, Dan. A couple things about The Empire Strikes Back.
We were pressed up against the time limit last week.
Probably noticed that.
We may have had to glaze over a few awesome things. I forgot. I didn't have time to mention. We should talk about Han Solo. My favorite shot in the movie is Han Solo firing on Darth Vader in Cloud City.
Mm-hmm.
I love when that door opens up and Han gets off like 3 or 4 shots that Vader has to deflect before he can pull the gun out of Han's hand.
Yeah.
He's a quick draw, man. It's like walking into a saloon and being like, pew, 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 pew.
And I just love it that Darth Vader is sitting at the head of the table,
like he's going to carve a turkey.
Right. Well, yes, we're gonna basically finish our discussion about Empire because we obviously had to stop. But even before we finish that, as I was listening to last week's podcast, I noticed a couple things that we said that didn't make sense, and I wanted to correct them. Well, always want to correct things. So, two things. One, we talked about audiences thinking that Darth Vader might be a robot, and that's one of the reasons why they did the whole back of his head thing. And then I realized that, well, if audiences really thought that, then they weren't listening to Obi-Wan Kenobi, because he said that the Force is an energy field between all living beings, not robots.
Okay.
So he couldn't be a robot. But then again, it was Star Wars.
Yeah, the mythology of Star Wars is so well understood now that you'd never have that doubt. But after the first movie, I bet there were a lot of people that just didn't really. If you only saw it once, you're not going to see it on cable or like anything the next day. You're not going to remember a lot.
Yeah, and people aren't like dissecting every little bit of dialogue in Star Wars and trying to figure out all the subtleties. No,
not for at least not back 20 years or so.
Back then, and this is a question, I guess. We were talking about Darth Vader kind of. Knowing some things and not knowing other things about what's going on in the universe. And there's a question that I had. I didn't actually look this up, but in the new version of Empire, when the Millennium Falcon floats away with the rest of the garbage, Slave One is with them, and he starts tracking them. So that's how the Empire knew that the Millennium Falcon was going there. But that looked like a special edition thing, and I'm wondering if that was there in the original one, and if it was less clear how the Empire knew where the Millennium Falcon was, and maybe that Darth Vader did just sort of know.
Okay, Carter, I'm going to figure it out. I have the movie right here. I'm now watching it, and we're gonna find out. He
actually has it on all the time.
It's just running on a loop.
That has Empire on it constantly.
I have the theatrical edition, the '90s special edition, and then the even newer DVD special edition, which has even more like little touches that George fixed, including the Hayden Christensen addition to the end of Jedi.
We'll talk about that later. And also, he took out the stupid scream that they inserted for Luke when he fell. They had that in the '90s one that they put in, and then they took it out. Finally,
Which one?
When Luke falls in Cloud City, they added a scream. Like,
Oh, okay.
I believe that was only in the '90s special edition.
Really likes tinkering with sound effects for some reason. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure what effect it actually has.
Because George Lucas is, he doesn't really care about actors or acting. He really just cares about like the technical stuff of the film and like making all like visuals and sound and all that. That's what he likes. That's the stuff he likes to do. Like all of his early work, it's really. What am I talking about? We're talking about The Empire Strikes Back. God.
Okay, in the original edition, the slave one is definitely there.
Okay.
And does take off to follow him. I might look at the newer version later and see if it looks different, but it's definitely there.
Okay. Cool. Well, just wanted to check. Thank you, John.
Now we know.
Now we know. Okay, so we didn't get to talk a lot about Han. I think that's the biggest thing that I think I got in everything I wanted to say about Luke's training and how critical that is to the movie, but we really didn't get to talk about Han at all. I think we spent a whole 2.5 minutes right at the very end, so
poor guy.
I think now will be our Han discussion. Poor guy, right?
I
Death
know.
Mark's not an easy thing to live with, Solo.
Your favorite line from the film?
Of all of the films. I mean, of all of the original films. We got the end of the podcast to talk about.
I bet that character has an entire expanded universe story, whoever that guy is.
Oh, I'm sure he does. He's a general. I remember when the Phantom Menace came out in Star Wars Insider, I think, or one of the Star Wars magazines. They had.
We never even talked about Star Wars Insider.
Yeah, one of the Star Wars magazines that I got, I remember very distinctly for a while, they had this ad. It was Lucasfilm, I think, or Lucas Books maybe did this ad, and it was a shot of the Senate from the Phantom Menace, and it was like all like this big, huge, cluttered frame of all the little pods with all the senators in it, and they had like an arrow pointing to one random one, and the thing was, you could write like a fan fiction thing, and it's like you could tell the backstory of this guy, and it'll be the official story, and we'll like
it'll be canonized.
And like we'll publish it in Insider or they didn't have the Adventure Journal anymore, so I don't exactly know where they were going to put it, but it's like you can write the story of this random senator, and it's like I feel like every single person that you've ever seen in any of the movies has like some sort of backstory associated with them now.
Yeah.
Well, what are you gonna do? That's what the fans like.
I thought it was particularly interesting to get a very different view of this rogue character because, like we pointed out in the first film, he basically doesn't have anything. He doesn't have many character traits in the first film.
No. She's rich. He's like, ooh, money. I love
pretty
money.
one-dimensional.
And, yeah, it's he's a bad guy and roguish, and then he makes a friend. Han makes a friend out of Luke, and Luke is sort of idealistic and not a drug smuggler like Han Solo is, and that sort of changes the way he thinks about the universe. And it's not always about the money. Sometimes you can come back and be a hero too. So that's
obviously Han has had some experiences that have colored his view of the universe and the way it works and what is possible in it.
Right. Like one of the things that I thought was really cool in Empire was we go from Han Solo in Star Wars, who thinks that lightsabers are sort of this now you got a lightsaber or whatever. It's like that's that archaic ancient weapon. Who would ever use anything like that? Blasters or like blasters are the thing. To Han Solo in Empire, riding on these like animals, and he actually picks up Luke's lightsaber. I think he's the only non-Jedi who operates a lightsaber in any of these movies. He picks it up to open up the Tauntaun. I always thought it was really cool that he like just picked up Luke's lightsaber. Like,
this weird little device. Fine, I'll use it this once.
Right, it's just it would be. I'm trying to think of a modern day example of something like that. It's you know using a sextant as opposed to a GPS phone or something to like figure out what direction you're going to go. I can't think of a good weapons analogy. A longbow or something. And I always thought that was really cool. And also just kind of like Han Solo kind of being a bit of a badass. It's like, I can use a lightsaber. I can use a lightsaber.
No biggie.
Luke Skywalker's not the only one who can use one. I can too. The opening is just all... I mean, Luke is still basically the same kind of person. Did Mark Hamill get into a car accident between these two movies? Because I noticed that...
Yes, he got into a car accident. Right? He also... Actually, during the filming of Star Wars, damaged his face in the trash compactor sequence, which they tried to hide for the rest of the filming, but in Empire they just gave up trying to hide it because they couldn't. They needed to show his face.
Right. I thought that's what had happened. You can really tell for some reason in the opening scenes in Empire that his face is a little...
I think the 3 years really shows on all of the actors. Like they look older.
They do.
They look like time has passed. They are weathered and they've grown.
Mark and Carrie probably more than...
They were kids in Star Wars.
Yeah, more than Harrison. I mean, because Harrison Ford was like 35 when they did Star Wars. Mark Hamill was like 22. Carrie Fisher was 18, 19 years old?
She was 18. She turned 19, I think, while they were filming.
She was a baby, man. Yeah, and the Han Solo at the beginning of Empire is just super different from the Han Solo in any of Star Wars. He's the Han Solo who takes the Tauntaun out in, your Tauntaun won't make it past the first marker. Well, I'll see you in hell. Like, he's willing to like put his life on the line to go rescue a friend, which, that's pretty cool. We've seen like how, he must be very good friends with Luke at this point. He must be very, very good friends with him.
And he thinks that he's really good friends with Leia.
So, like, Han is just desperate for Leia to say anything positive to him, and he just wants anything.
Any small sign of recognition.
Yes, just like
I like you too.
It's like they're in high school, and like Han's the girl and Leia's the guy. Oh. And I guess I was never really super clear if Han really, really was going to leave, because he was giving Leia every chance to get him to stay. So he's looking for any excuse to stay for sure. Right. I mean, and I kind of like your theory that Chewbacca was doing his part to try and keep them together. Well, if they were trying to leave, why would he start taking the ship apart? Doesn't make any sense. This goes there, that goes there. Right? But I mean, it's obvious that that Leia has feelings for Han, but it's also kind of short-sighted of him. I guess, like, they got a war to run, like, she's busy. She, No time for love, Dr. Drones? Maybe we will do those. Someone asked on Twitter if we'll do Sam did. Sam did. Maybe we'll do Indiana Jones. Not it won't be soon. And Han totally swings into action when the pressure's on. It's like the Empire's on the base, and that hallway caves in, and he's like, all right, we'll take her out on the Falcon, like, let's go. And that's brave, although it is also convenient for him. Yeah, he wanted to be the head of Leia's security. Yeah. This way he gets to be. Yes, and then the whole rest of the movie, basically, is Luke getting trained on how to be a Jedi, and Han courting Leia. So before the carbon freeze scene, there was actually a moment that happened on the Millennium Falcon, and it wasn't the first kiss that Han and Leia have that gets interrupted by C-3PO, but they're, I think, while they are still attached to the Star Destroyer, Han is kind of going through all the different systems that they could go to, and Leia just kind of like sneaks up behind him, and she gives him like a little peck on the cheek.
Yeah,
that's where you know, like they're in love, and like this is like a relationship now, you know?
Yeah, her body language in that scene was, I mean, who is she performing for other than him? Like, she's giving him all the signals.
Yes. So they might not have said to each other, "I love you," but at that point, I think they both knew, and that's why Han says, "I know," because like,
yes, oh.
That's why Harrison Ford said, "I know."
That's why Harrison Ford decided to say that.
I love to watch the director in like behind the scenes stuff talk about how that scene went down. Because, you know, he talks about, you know, in the script it was "I love you too," and they're like, "Oh, we tried that and that didn't work, and, you know, we tried some other things, and, like, Carrie had some ideas."
It's really interesting that they tried "I love you too" and realized that it wasn't working.
Right, yeah, I think Harrison, like, was the one who said, like, this isn't working.
It just doesn't feel right.
You know, and you know, they tried stuff. They came up with an idea and had Harrison and Carrie do it, and none of it was working. And so finally, they just turned the cameras on. We're just like, "Harrison, just go. Just say whatever comes to your mind. Just say the first thing that comes to your mind." And that's where "I know" came from. It's a famous story. It's one of those stories that, you know, 100 years from now, when there actually is a religion around Star Wars, that people that will baked into the mythology about how Harrison Ford came up with this idea. You know, it came to him, you know, like from God, from whatever. From the Force.
As long as the god of this religion is not George Lucas.
George. And then that's also the most devastating, I think, of the entire series. It's one of the most devastating things is when Han Solo, when that slab of carbonite just like hits the ground and makes that, it just slams to the ground, and his face is all, you can tell like it was obviously painful, and he's got his hands up. That's horrible.
You get the pain of Luke's arm, and like you feel the sympathy for Luke and everything, but Han is like, he's screwed, man.
Right, and it's awful. It's also awful to watch Leia when Slave One blasts off, and you know she's shooting at it, and that's almost the most desperate thing. Like she's shooting a blaster at a spaceship because
like, please just stop.
Right, like that's obviously not going to do anything, right? You know, but she does it anyway because she's just overcome. She's completely overcome with the situation, and it's a situation that she has no control over, which is very different for Leia because you know she's usually like. I don't think they ever gave her a title or anything, but she's obviously one of the people in charge of the entire rebellion.
Yeah.
And here she is in this like really tiny story about love and stuff. Oh, Han Solo. Well, hopefully he's okay. We won't know for 2 more weeks.
I know. He's going to be frozen forever.
Okay, so... Last week, we were talking about Nintendo, as we always do. I don't know, people don't ding us for talking about Nintendo.
They definitely don't.
No, they're like, yeah, that's fine. When we talk about Apple, which we are going to talk about this week, they're like, oh, you guys always talk about Apple. and it's like, oh, you guys are Apple fanboys. But it's like, we also always talk about Nintendo, and we're also Nintendo fanboys, but people are, like, fine with that.
I was literally playing Super Mario 64 on my Nintendo 64 last night.
Well,
the only reason I stopped is because my 64 has a faulty power supply and it resets itself randomly.
That's lame.
That's not fun.
That is not fun. That is not fun at all. I was also playing Mario 64, but I was playing it on the new Nintendo DSi that I just bought.
You bought a Nintendo DS?
I did.
The DSi is the one with the cameras on it now?
Yeah, it's the they have
bigger screens.
No, I think that I think you can still get a DS. I don't know if they're still making them. I don't think they are. You can still get them. So the DSi is basically the cheapest, you know, lowest on the rung product that you can get portable from Nintendo. Then they have the DSi XL. That's got the bigger screens.
Okay, that's right.
Right.
I stopped paying attention after the first DS was released because I just couldn't keep up anymore.
Right. Yeah, right. They had the DS, they stopped making it, and that's the one that was really clunky. The DSi is very slim and sleek, and I obviously got the matte black option because that's the correct one. It's very nice to hold. It's got that...
I have the Cobalt one. There's nothing wrong with Cobalt.
It's just the plastic is too plasticky. I don't like that. I like the matte.
Ladies and gentlemen, Carter just said the plastic is too plasticky. Let's let's draw some attention to that.
Shut up. I just like the matte finish, whatever. And so they have the DSi, they have the DSi XL, and then they have the 3DS.
3DS, okay.
The 3DS is bigger. It has bigger screens, and it has the.
It also has 3D.
And it has 3D.
That
it's
whole
got a
thing.
little nubbin thing on it that simulates an analog stick.
Right.
It's that little plasticky thing. I think maybe I'm missing a DS one because I thought there was one of those. Maybe the XL has that. There are some DS games that you can have analog control of them, which would be frankly nice to have because playing.
It'd be nice to have that option.
Playing Mario 64 with a D-pad is It's you have oh my god, it's brilliant. The left trigger button is the bring the camera directly behind you button on the DS, which is so nice.
Yeah, it's Super Mario 64 is a game that you half play and half fight with.
Right.
To keep the camera behind you.
Yeah, the GameCube was a lot better for this. In a lot of those 3D games, you're not really moving your character; you're like moving the camera. So you've got the control like straight north, and you're going as fast as you can. And you use that little C stick. They replaced the C buttons from the 64 with that little C stick on the GameCube.
Yeah,
and that controlled the camera. And then basically, you would move the camera, and your character would move. As opposed to you actually moving the analog controller. And you can kind of sort of do that with the DS by just constantly clicking the L button again. But I'm like wearing these, even after having it for just a couple days, I'm wearing like little divots into my left thumb from squeezing the top and the left or the top and the right buttons together so I can get Mario to move, on the 45s. So I
have big hands, and the DS has been a problem for me because it's too small.
I have dainty womanly hands, so it's not.
I get like cramps in my hands.
I don't have dainty womanly hands, but anyway, I don't have overly large hands, and I haven't noticed any problems with it. And I actually I like the product. I wasn't going to get a 3DS. Because it can't play a lot of DS games, apparently. A lot of the early games it just can't play.
Oh, really?
So,
I did not know that.
So my options were to get a DSi, and it can play every DS game except a couple 3D games.
Right.
Or get the 3DS, which was much more expensive. And it can't play a lot of the DS games, and it only gives me access to this tiny sliver of content, which I'm not convinced is going to be very much. The one thing that I was like, was they ported Ocarina of Time for the 3DS, and it would be really cool to be able to play that. But
yeah, it would.
They're not.
It's probably better hardware than this. Well, of course, it's better hardware than the 64 was.
It is.
It's probably a nicer graphic experience.
I mean, the DS is slightly better hardware than the 64 was, and this product has been out for years. The 3DS it's pretty good. If we were going to talk about Nintendo this week, which we are not, I would say something about the 3DS and the iPhone and how the 3DS is sort of might be the last mobile product or portable product that Nintendo makes. They've not been selling a whole lot.
They're running into a competitor that I don't think they could have anticipated 5 years ago.
No,
10 years ago.
I think we mentioned this on a previous podcast that iOS gaming is a blue water market. Nintendo had no competitor in the mobile market except the PSP, but I think that those are kind of two different things.
Yeah, PSP is like a hardcore kind of. You got to be initiated to understand the PlayStation mobile thing.
Right, they don't have those games where it's like, you draw something, and like there's lots of like kid family drawing games on the DS, which just PlayStation people will be like, that's not a real game.
Give me something to slaughter.
Yeah, that's a baby game. But iOS gaming, is completely different from either of those, and it's, on tens of millions. It's in tens of millions of people's pockets, and it's just a $1.99 away, pushing on the App Store. So
Nintendo tried so hard to engage new markets, and mobile gaming came up and like did it all, and Nintendo got left behind.
I mean, I've got these two devices in front of me right now. In my left hand, I've got this DSi. And on my right hand, I have my iPhone. My iPhone is probably 50% less mass. It actually fits in my pocket, whereas the DS does not really fit in my pocket. You can put it in your back pocket, I guess. And my phone can do a whole bunch of games, some of which are pretty good. None of them are as great to control or to use as a game on the DS.
Right,
but
no dedicated sticks and buttons and stuff. But
no, but they're reasonably fun, and I can do a million other things with my phone.
I have a game on my... I was playing Dungeon Defenders on my Kindle Fire, which, holy crap, you can play like an awesome-looking 3D game on that little tablet device, and there are no controls for moving on the screen, and I skipped the tutorial. I was like, I want to just see if I can play it. And I just started moving by manipulating the screen without reading anything, and I had no problems. It is completely intuitive.
Is that the kind of Diablo style one, like you point where you're going to go?
No, you actually like move and walk, and you can you move with your left hand. You just kind of draw with your thumb on the screen, and then if you whip the screen with your right hand, you will move the camera.
That's cool.
And it never puts controls on your screen. It doesn't draw them on like where you're supposed to touch. It just interprets like, oh, he's trying to move forward.
That's smart.
It's awesome.
The new Infinity Blade game is going to be Diablo style. There hasn't been a real good Diablo style game on iOS yet. Most doing Diablo style on a phone is just too small. Your thumbs are too big. But it's for the iPad, this new game. So okay. I'm excited. I'm excited for that. And it's only for the iPad 3 or the new iPad. It's actually one of the reasons why I got that was so that I could play that game. But yeah, Nintendo, we'll talk about them. We'll talk about the history of Nintendo and the Wii U and where they're going and all that. We'll save it for another podcast. Maybe after I've played with this device for a little while and I can talk about all the cool stuff. I'm playing a Zelda game right now, and it's very good.
I've put more time into my DS than definitely any other, except for probably I am very close with the Game Boy Advance, like rivaling for my time. I really like Nintendo's handheld devices. I will be sad to see them go when they do.
They will. Hopefully they keep developing games, like iOS games, but maybe they'll just close up shop on that because they're like, but we want to have control over the interface. And Apple's like, no, that's not how it works.
Maybe them and Valve and Apple will all be friends together.
Wouldn't that be something? And Zappos. Okay, but one last thing before we get to our two quick random questions. Caprio posted on our video that he's going to have to go watch Star Wars now. Yes, you must.
Yes, you should.
You should. I just wanted to put that out there. Please, go watch it. It's very good. It's an important part of culture. Random question number 1. This comes from Ben. Why is a forehead called a forehead instead of a 5-head or a 3-head?
I actually, when I go to get my hair done, if I'm getting my hair cut by a new, I don't go to see the same person. And if it's someone who hasn't cut my hair before, I usually tell them to leave my bangs alone and I will usually say this, because I have a 5-head. And that always makes them laugh, and then they leave my bangs alone. But yeah, I've got this. I don't think my hairline's really receding yet, so thanks, Mom and Dad. But it is pretty far back already. It always has been, and I've got a giant forehead that I usually call a 5-head.
My hairline is receding. Thanks, Mom and Dad. Mostly Dad. Don't comment on the video about how the hair thing comes from your mom. I know that. I was just making a joke.
Yeah, well, I know that too, but by that account, I should be bald, because that doesn't... both my mom's dad and her brother were balding when they were younger than me, and I'm still doing fine.
We need to get to... what's it called? Punnett square? What's the biologist thing for genetic?
Yes,
for genetic?
yeah.
Punnett square? Something? I think that's right. Yeah, so Ben, a forehead is called a forehead because...
because of the way the English language works.
Language works, yes. So your head is this sphere, or this hemisphere, I don't know if it's talking about your whole skull, but, or your whole, face in the back of your head, but your head is this hemisphere on top of your neck. And 4 means front, and, it's the 4 part of your head. It's the part of your head that's on the front. And actually, that was going to be what my answer was to this question, but I went to the
so smart alecky.
Right. I went to the Wikipedia, and actually the very first sentence is this. In human anatomy, the forehead is the and that's italicized, part of the head, italicized. That's the sentence.
Doesn't get much more literal than that.
It is formally an area of the head bounded by 3 features, 2 of the skull and 1 of the scalp.
Okay.
There you go. That's what a forehead is. That's why it's called forehead.
Good to know.
Yes. That was not Captain Science. I cannot qualify.
I hope not.
I cannot qualify as Captain Science. Ron wants to know if we've ever held or operated a welding torch. Have you?
No, definitely not. I've used a soldering gun many times.
Just about to say that I have used one, but only like once or twice. Never a welding torch? No, I've not. I've never welded anything. I've used thermite before, which is used in like deep sea ocean welding. In a chemistry class, that's always fun. Don't look directly into the center, kids. You'll burn your eyeballs out.
I haven't seen thermite burning, but I've seen magnesium burning, and that will also blind you if you look at it.
Yeah, that's also really cool. Like little strips of magnesium.
Oh my god, that was amazing! I remember my science teacher telling us about it, and someone was like, "Can you show us?" And he was like, "Maybe someday if we have some time, I'll show you." And like there was one day at the end of class, he was like, "All right, Jen, pull the curtains. Chris, close the door. I'm gonna light some magnesium on fire." Everyone was like, "Yes!" It was pretty cool. It was like the sun was in the center of the room.
Yes. We had a physics teacher at my high school who subsequently ended up. I think he taught one course of physics and one computer science course. He became like the IT director or something. And maybe one of the reasons why is he did the thermite lesson in class where you light some thermite on fire and watch it, burn and
not watch
it. Like lava. Well, yeah. Well, it looks like lava. You just don't look it right in the center.
Right.
It looks like lava. It's really cool. You put it in like a terracotta pot, and he did it indoors. And he actually created a rule in the school that you're not allowed to do any of these experiments inside.
Ooh.
You'd think this would work, but it didn't. He had the thermite in a pot with sand and whatever, some stuff inside of it for it to like chew through, and a hole at the bottom of the pot. Or does it cut or does it burn through the bottom of? I think he had a whole terracotta pot, so it could like burn through the bottom of it. To help that would one of the things to help like slow it down and cool it off, and make it stop. And then underneath it, he had like a big like a bucket of water for the thermite to like hit and cool down in.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't have enough water in it.
Oh.
Whatever. He just didn't think it through clearly. I think
poor planning.
Right. Instead of a bucket, I think he had kind of like one of those aluminum pans that you like bake a turkey in, full of water. And that thermite, burnt, like went through the sand, burned through the terracotta, went into the water, and it was still burning, and it like burnt through the tile.
Carter, why did we just lose you for the second time? Why is Michael Cera so evil this episode?
Michael Cera has been particularly troublesome.
First of all, Michael Cera made me oversleep, so I missed the actual start time of our podcast by an hour and a half.
Michael.
And then he turned off my alarm, and then he's made Audacity stop recording for absolutely no reason twice.
Yes.
And then the second time, it locked up. Just for good measure.
We have a lot of backups and contingency plans based on a podcast.
Based on a previous experience where this happened.
The Lost podcast, the one that we tried to reassemble, but then...
Yes, we have redundancies now in place.
We do. Well, John Cruzan had no redundancies for if the water wasn't enough for the thermite.
Gotcha.
And it started burning through a hole into the tile. And actually, I did lab work in that lab, and that tile, they never replaced that tile, mostly because they wanted to make fun of John, this guy, for the rest of his life. So it's not like a big deal, right? Like, this is not going to burn the school down. Thermite doesn't work that way. It was just like kind of scary, and it's like, oh my god, and the whole class kind of got like, oh, amped up, and like, oh, what are we gonna do? And for some reason, some kid just ran out in the hallway and pulled the fire alarm. Like, there's thermite burning. Call the fire department. so they can put it out or something. I don't know. The kid wasn't thinking. So the fire department had to come to the school, and like I think they got a fine because it's like, don't pull fire alarms.
Yeah.
And to this day, there's a standing rule in the department. It's like all thermite experiments must be done outside. So you just like go right outside the lab and do it outside.
So the point is, we've never used a welding torch.
But long story short, no, I never used a welding torch.
We had shop classes in our high school that taught the use, but I was not in any of them.
I'm just remembering now. I've never used a welding torch, but I've used the filter from a welder's mask before. It's like it's kind of like the size of the screen of an iPhone or a phone that size. So that's like how big that plate is. It's about a centimeter thick. The kind I used was green, and I used it in the theater program to adjust the lights. If you're a hotshot lighting expert on the stage, what you do to make sure that the light is centered where you want it to be centered is you stick your thumb up in the air where you want it to be centered, and you look at the shadow and then have someone up in the crow's nest adjust it. But that's if you're like really clever and smart, can figure that out. We found a trick. If you take a welder's mask and look directly into the center of a light, don't do that. Of a stage light, they're very, very bright. Don't look in the center of them. But if you look through a welder's mask, you'll see the outline of the can, and then you'll see where the bulb is. And if you're standing where you want the light to be centered, all you have to do is have people adjust it until the bulb is right in the center of the circle.
Wouldn't it be awesome if we had eyeballs that could just do that? Just like change filters.
I think Google is working on something with that.
Yeah, just like change the aperture of your iris automatically.
Like go infrared or
not your iris, your pupil. Let me be correct with my terminology so we can avoid a follow-up next week.
Sure. Yeah, that would be cool. The eye is already pretty cool though.
Oh yeah, obviously.
Okay. Well, we have a main topic. We haven't talked about this in a long time. It's Apple.
It's Apple and CEO and Tim Cook and like all that stuff.
A lot of stuff. So I've been consciously trying to not talk very, very much about Apple.
Well, for many reasons. I mean, they've been kind of getting dragged through the news since we stopped talking about them.
Yeah, I mean,
for a couple different reasons.
There's a lot of stuff going on with Apple, but like the biggest impetus is actually Dave. He actually tweeted at us. It's like, can you do one podcast where you don't talk about Apple at all? This was like a month or two, I don't know, a while ago, and I've been trying, and we have not had Apple as a topic for a long time that I can remember. Certainly not a main topic. We mentioned them in that they had some legal problems about
which they're still having.
Yeah, I mean it's a long, complicated thing, and I have further opinions on it right now, but I don't think we should talk about it because it's like it's a legal case and it's not it's not done. But we're going to talk about Apple business, and I've got some thoughts about the upcoming WWDC, rumors about the phone. We want to talk about Tim Cook. Tim Cook's a very interesting fellow, and an article that Shawn sent to me that I was planning on reading, but you gave me the impetus to actually read it. It was in my read later thing. So
yeah.
When you tweeted at me, I'm like, okay, I'll read this so I can be plugged in with the community and have an opinion.
It's a Fortune article about kind of basically just how Tim Cook has at least slightly changed the culture of Apple. It would seem to a more corporate and open to monetary concerns kind of company, instead of being so worried about design, being more worried about the bottom line, which I think is what Tim Cook was hired for, right? He's the supply chain guy.
Yeah, before he was at Apple, I should have had his Wikipedia page open. I believe he was an executive at, I want to say, HP, or it was one of those companies out there, and he was doing operations. I don't know if he was a C-level operations guy at wherever he was. He was at Compaq, which is why I thought HP,
that makes sense.
He got bought by HP. He was the VP of Corporate Materials, which is basically basically, what he did at Apple. He was the chief operating officer, and he was responsible for supply chain management. And by all accounts, he is one of the foremost experts in operations and in managing a global supply chain.
I would assume, based on their stock price and their profits and their cash on hand, that all the evidence is there to support that claim.
Yes, he refers to product by freshness. It's kind of like a
produce
store, like produce. You don't want to have product sitting on the on the shelf too long, and you don't want to have supply sitting on the shelf too long in the supply chain. You want everything to be used quickly, sold, and every device that Apple has, every new device. I don't know if this is true of any of the Mac products, but all the new stuff. I believe the iPod, the iPod Touch, certainly the iPhone, and the iPad, and most of and I think every iteration of the iPod, the iPhone, and the iPad have been quote unquote supply constrained for the first several months, and even I think that the iPad 2 was supply constrained. It's still supply constrained to this day. And that means that they can't make any more of them. Like, there's greater demand for their product, and they have the supply to provide. They just don't have enough stuff and enough bandwidth to make all of the iPads that would satisfy the global demand for iPads. And I'm talking about the iPad too. And you hear that in like the quarterly calls that Tim Cook does with the CFO, Peter Oppenheimer, that Steve Jobs would occasionally get on when he was still alive. Rest in peace, Steve. And Steve would occasionally throw some throw some bombs on those calls, talking about this crap thing from HP, and you could, Tim Cook and Peter Oppenheimer would be like, like, this is a very professional call. We're not supposed to do that, which was always fun. And you don't hear Tim doing that anymore. And the bulldog inside of Steve, which I miss. But yes, he's an expert in it.
Yeah, that stands like in stark contrast to, for instance, like Sony, who certain stores that supply PlayStation 3s have had to do things where they just slash the price of it because they've had consoles sitting on their shelves for months that have not moved, that they're just like, we need to make space for other things that actually sell.
There have been a couple products, the iPad especially, where some commentators and people who follow Apple have suggested that the next version of it should be more expensive because the demand is so high. Instead of just making more of them, they should just charge more for the next version, which would probably cause a bit of a press nightmare. But it would blow over in a couple weeks, and then people would just buy them. So, I mean, there's an idea there.
Every time one of them comes out, someone does a breakdown and shows how much of a profit that they're making. I don't think anyone would be really that surprised.
Apple, their MO is always to push further down on price.
Yeah.
So they would never do that, but, they could. And, some people think that, for some of their products, maybe they should. But, so you were talking about, changing some of the corporate priorities of Apple, and I have a quotation from this article that I want to read out. This is from one of a VP in engineering is quoted in this article as saying, "I've been told that any meeting of significance is now always populated by project management and global supply management." He says, "When I was there, engineering decided what we wanted, and it was the job of product management and supply management to go get it. It shows a shift in priority."
I don't know. I don't know if that shows a shift in priority or if it shows a realization of the real world.
Yes, I like that. That is my thought on this. Is I don't think that regardless of who is the CEO of this company, they would be shifting they would be shifting in that direction, because last quarter, they did 35 million iPhones and 12 million iPads. I think you're going to want to have those people in those meetings, right?
Yeah,
it's not just, we're going to make this beautiful new device. It's like, yeah, we also got to figure out how we're going to get it out.
These are not pennies that we're talking about here.
No. This is a very complex operation. It's one of the most complex operations in the world outside of like the U.S. government, or maybe like the certain types of infrastructures for delivering, energy, right? Those are probably as complex or more complex as Apple. Like the entire global infrastructure for getting oil from, where oil comes from to, into a usable product. That's probably more complicated than Apple. But other than, but there's not a lot that's much more complicated than this particular way of making these products. So in that instance, I really don't think that that's a shift in priority or a shift in culture. It's just like Apple would have to do that.
We have to think about money. Duh.
Right. We have to think about and we have to think about how we're going to make these things. And that is about design. So that's something that I want to talk about in a little bit. So I'll save that. So another thing I noticed in this article was people saying that, well, if Steve were here, or Steve would have done this, or Steve would have done that. And it's just impossible to write an article or to have an opinion about stuff right now and not say something about what if Steve were still there. I've noticed that everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
It's just,
He kind of casts a big shadow.
But it's like, we need to get past that. And anytime someone, especially
it's not like Steve Jobs was Apple. I mean, he was Steve Jobs. He wasn't even at Apple for its entirety.
And it's not like Steve Jobs isn't there, like making the little, tinkering around in Photoshop with pixels, making the icon for Safari or something. He's not doing everything.
Yeah.
When he was there, and neither is Tim Cook. But I just find it particularly annoying when I see people talk about, well, if Steve were here. What's more annoying to me is when people say Steve would have done this. It's like, well, how do you know that? Like,
don't speak for him.
Right. People like invoke his memory like they're conjuring a spell. It's like, well, if Steve were here, he never would have put Siri out in the 4S. I think someone mentions that I think that's what I was thinking. Someone said, if Steve would have gone, ape crap, if he had been alive when Siri got pushed out. And Apple has pushed out stuff that was bad and that they had to pull back on and when Steve was there. So I think that that's crazy to think that, while Steve was there, Apple never made a mistake ever. Really? That's crazy. The G4 Cube. Apple's made plenty of mistakes. And two, Steve was involved with the development of the 4S right up until the day he died. Like, he knew Siri was going to be on it. He knew it was going to be a beta product. He knew it was going to be called beta product. And he was fine with it. It's just people. It's not like that was. It's not like that is a CEO's decision either. Like, that was probably a lot of people were involved in that. It doesn't come down to one guy. Right. I mean, I think Steve also. There are probably things that he said, yeah, we're not going to do that. And maybe we know about it, maybe we didn't know about it. But, to say, now after the fact that you can now predict, well, this mistake that Apple did, Steve never would have done that. It's like, well, how do you know that? Steve might have said yes.
Because we have his brain on a hard drive, Steve.
In the Walter Isaacson biography, which is not very good, he mentions that Steve was the loudest voice against putting iTunes on Windows, about making a version of iTunes for Windows. And in retrospect, that would have been a horrible idea.
That would be awful.
Right? The popularity of the iPod comes primarily from the fact that you could use it on Windows. The original iPod, you could only use it on a Mac, and you could only use it over FireWire. Two things that PC users don't have. Most of them did not have.
That would be like opening a new store, which essentially is what iTunes is, and only putting it in 10% of the markets that you could.
Or saying, we only take American Express here.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, well, most people don't have American Express. Most people have a Visa and MasterCard.
That would be one of those things that Tim Cook would have been like, this is money. Why would you say no to money?
Right. And the phenomenal success of the iPod on Windows is one of the reasons why that was a big impetus for people switching to the Mac. They're like, oh, I really like this product that Apple does. What other things?
What else does this company Macintosh make? Apple.
And I think the iPhone probably did more for that than the iPod. But the iPod saved Apple. We can kind of get into the iMac saved Apple. Apple was going to die. Steve Jobs came in, he cut a whole bunch of products, and then the very first thing they worked on was the iMac. And people were still sort of like, I don't know about this Apple thing. I guess Steve is back, and they're not going to go bankrupt right now, but I'm not sure about this company. And then they come out with the iMac, and everyone's like, this is cool, right? It's the first computer ever that was cool. You know, in this era of computers, you know, I think that you could probably make an argument for, like, the Commodore 64 was very
I was
cool.
just going to say the Commodore 64, actually.
Right, you know,
I don't even know anything about it. I have no first-hand experience, just like history lessons.
Right, or maybe like an Amiga is cool because you can do all this whizzy stuff with the with drawing and images and stuff. But like the iMac was cool. It was also really great in education. That's two areas that Apple excels in: being cool and providing things to education. Providing these tools so that children use them and grow up with them, and then want to use them as adults. It's
Indoctrination. I mean, education.
Education, the education market. But yeah, Steve was the one who was like, I don't want to put it on Windows. He's the one who said, you know, I want to go thermonuclear on Android, when, like, you probably don't want to go thermonuclear on Android. Like, you're probably doing fine right now. He was just, you know, he was emotional, and, you know, he made plenty of bad decisions. He made lots of great decisions, too. So anytime people say Steve would have done this, I'm like, shut up.
You don't know.
At one point in this article, the journalist writes, as operations chief, Cook flew so far under the radar, he was practically invisible outside the company. I just wanted to say, that's not true if you followed Apple. You knew who Tim Cook was if you followed Apple, because the global supply chain management of the company is really, really important. And he was on all the earnings calls, and people knew who Tim Cook was.
Yeah, maybe not a household name like Steve Jobs was, but if you knew about the company and were following them, hopefully you knew who he was, or you weren't paying attention.
Right. I mean, he was the one on those calls. He's on those calls with Peter Oppenheimer. Now, I don't know very much about Peter Oppenheimer. I'll say that. I know his name.
He must be practically invisible.
I know his name, and I know that he gets on those calls and he talks about numbers, and he must be great at his job. Other than that, I know nothing about him, other than the fact that Apple doesn't do C titles. They don't really do that as a company. They had Steve was the CEO, they had Tim as the COO, and they had Peter as the CFO. That's it. Everybody else was a senior vice president for some like division or some like area of the company. They didn't have chief technology officer, you know, chief whatever. They didn't dangle C titles over people. I believe most of the senior vice presidents are also on the board, so they're like a C officer. They just don't call them that. And in fact, there is no COO. Tim didn't, when he became the CEO, he didn't
no replacement.
No, his replacement is the senior vice president for operations. So I just think that's silly. I thought that was sort of silly for this person to say. It's like, he was practically invisible outside the company. Well, yeah, maybe if you're, you know, an average everyday Joe, but like if you're reading Fortune and you're trying to learn about Apple, you probably should have known about Tim Cook. Especially as it became more and more obvious that he was being groomed to take over for Steve. Or, you know, he started doing parts of the keynotes that Steve would normally do, and you know, he would give like an update on the Mac or this or that. I think he's doing pretty well at those.
Yeah, the article speaks very well of him. It talks about what a good employer he is, and the people that really respect him at the company. It said that I forget what organization did a evaluation of the employees' approval of the CEO, and it remains unchanged. It went from 97% approval under Steve Jobs to 97% approval under Tim Cook. Yeah.
Yeah, the sort of stuff that Tim has changed is all kind of, it's interesting things, and it speaks to Tim Cook's personality and his like personal values.
It's good of him to do that, because it's good that he's not trying to be someone else. He's taking his strengths and using them.
Right, like one of the first things that he did as CEO was he developed a program for encouraging charitable giving, which Steve Jobs is somewhat famously, and it's mostly because his foil is Bill Gates, who has an entire charitable foundation empire.
I'm pretty sure Bill Gates is going to be responsible for eliminating malaria from this planet.
Yeah, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is like a huge force for good, and Steve Jobs has a lot of money, or had a lot of money, and he sort of is very he's well known, and was well known for not really giving a lot to charity. There are certainly interesting discussions to be had and flame wars to be had over, well, Steve Jobs did so much for the world by being Steve Jobs, by bringing about Apple and a lot of there's a famous anecdote from when they were developing the Mac, I believe. I don't think it was the Apple II. That one of the software engineers was there late and had been slaving for like 48 hours over this one thing in maybe like Mac Paint or I don't know. And he showed it to Steve, and it, like, the way he had set it up, it required like 3 or 4 clicks to do something. And Steve was like, you gotta make this simpler. Like, this is crap. Like Steve Jobs would say, it's like, this is crap. Takes way too many clicks to do this. You gotta redo this. And here's this poor kid, he'd been working for 48 hours, probably, no sleep, no food. And, he's got this thing that he thinks is great. And he takes it to Steve, and Steve's like, this is crap. And then the guy kind of breaks down a little bit, and Steve, in one of his few moments of being kind of a nice guy, is like, look, if we spend another 24 hours making this, instead of using 4 clicks, you can get this done with 1 click. How many people do you think are going to use this product? And the guy's like, hundreds of thousands of people are going to use this product. He's like, yeah, and they're going to use it for hours a day, right? I was like, yeah, you're going to use it for hours a day. And saving those couple clicks, that's like 2 or 3 seconds right there. Over the course of 10 or 20 years, you're going to save billions of seconds, which adds up to like hundreds of people's lives. So you spending this extra time is actually going to save people's lives. So yeah, he was. You're probably gonna have to bleep me here. He was a prick, but the way he thought about his work was really different from the way a lot of people think about their work.
In that example, he's thinking globally. He's not thinking about, like, this will be better for me if this kid does this. Right. He's thinking the whole way through the consequences of what will really happen if this is not changed.
Yeah, there's a great keynote when they introduced the Aqua interface when they were rolling out OS X. And he talked about what you have to do when you're building an operating system. And what he said was, this is a big endeavor, that takes lots of people. And when you start with an operating system, with something this big, you have to begin humbly. You have to think, what's a button? What's a window look like? What are all these key, essential, elemental components? And he said something like, and then you spend like 5 months trying to figure out what's a button. So, and they did that.
Well, he's right. Like, if you start with the assumption that you already know what all those things are, maybe you're going to make poor design decisions. Maybe you're not going to fully think through the consequences of what you're doing by thinking of a menu the same way you always have.
So I want to come back to that at the end when we talk about like history. For Tim, one of the biggest things is money, obviously, and something that this article has brought up and lots of articles and people talking about this have brought up was the dividend and the buyback. That is not something that Steve was ever willing to do. And the reason is 100% Steve Jobs. It's crazy that this one person was like, I don't want to give away any of our money because what if something bad happens and it's like 1997 all over again? We're going to wish that we had all this money. And it's like, Steve, we have like all of the money in the world. We should do, and there's no way you can't, $100 billion, right? It's like, you can't spend $100 billion. There's not enough stuff in the world to buy. You'd have to buy like aircraft carriers, like, and he was like, no, I don't want to do that. And it's also interesting to think about his personal history. He was always very poor until he broke into this. And yeah, I just think it's fascinating that the will of this one man was enough to like make a decision over tens of billions of dollars. And then Tim Cook is in charge, and now he's like, we're doing a dividend, we're doing a buyback. This is insane that we haven't done this yet. Right?
It's probably been festering for years.
Apple and Steve Jobs specifically could have been sued by the shareholders for not releasing a dividend, for sort of managing their money poorly. Final lines of the story. I thought this was interesting. It speaks a lot to Steve Jobs' personality and to how people think about the kind of the dichotomy between Steve Jobs and Tim Cook. So this is how this guy ended this article. At Apple, Jobs was simultaneously revered, loved, and feared. Cook clearly is a demanding boss, but he's not scary. He's well respected, but not worshipped. As Apple enters a complex new phase of its corporate history, perhaps it doesn't need a god as CEO, but a mere mortal who understands how to get the job done.
I knew there was a reason I sent you this article. I've sent you a few that were a little more aggressive. Like, they weren't actively hating on Apple, but they were kind of like not on their side in the situation. This one seems pretty fair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is very fair. I think that the Adam Lashinsky is the journalist. I think that, particularly on thinking that the whole operations focus that Apple is taking is potentially something that Tim Cook is responsible for. I think that that's the part that he's the most off base on.
Right.
Mostly it's an on-target article. He obviously talked to a lot of people. He did the journalism that a lot of people don't do. People think that if you're talking about Apple, you can just say stuff and get away with it.
I heard this rumor about the Apple TV.
Jeez. Talk about that. Yeah, and this is clearly it's a good piece of journalism.
That last line actually made me think of my own job, my own daily life. A couple of years ago, we opened a new my corporate office. Like, we are a small family chain. We have 3 stores in the area, and a couple of years ago, we opened our new flagship store. Up until that point, my store was the flagship store. And they took the GM from our store and moved him there because this guy is the Steve Jobs of our situation. Like, he's not Steve Jobs, but he is a single-minded, like, he has his hand in everything that happens in the store, and pretty much if you don't do it his way, you are probably going to be faced with an earful of loud, angry sounds. And after he left, we got another guy for a little while, but then he left. And then we got this new guy to the company who's never worked for our company before. He is a collaborator. Like, he likes talking to everyone in the department, not just the heads of the department. He likes talking to the low-level people to see what's going on, because sometimes even those people have good ideas. Sometimes I'm one of those people. Like, I see the difference in management styles, and I see the effects that it has on us as employees and the way that the store has changed. It's really changed the culture of our store to have this new guy in place.
Yes, and I think it would be foolish to think that Apple won't change some bit with Steve Jobs not there. And so the final point I wanted to make is John Gruber, and I still have respect for John Gruber, even though there was this dust up with 5x5, which you mentioned on 5 Things.
Which actually, when I mentioned it, I didn't know there was a dust up. I didn't know they were fighting. I just knew they stopped the show. I didn't know why.
Yeah, that was going to be a main topic, but then we decided to talk about other things. John Gruber has this talk that he gave at Macworld in 2010, and I'm lifting this from him, so I'm just citing him. This is like Wikipedia. This is my little citation for where I got this idea from. This isn't from me. That he thinks that, if you ask the question, like, what does Steve Jobs do? Like, when he was still there, what do you do? And I think, someone asked him this at like one of the few times he sat down for journalists. And he says, he had some hand wavy thing, like, well, I go to meetings and I make sure that blah 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 whatever. It's like he didn't.
I wear turtlenecks.
I wear turtlenecks. Wear mock turtlenecks and jeans. And John Gruber's hypothesis is that Steve Jobs, he's not a software engineer. He's not a hardware engineer. He's not like with Johnny Ive in the lab, like milling things out of aluminum. He's not, working on a view for iOS. He's not like working on the APIs. But that he did make a product, and it's Apple, the company, that when he first made the Mac and the first incarnation of Apple, he didn't really know how a global company should be structured, and that's one of the reasons why he got kicked out, because he didn't know what he was doing. And he learned how to do that, in the long dark
Not only did he learn it, he may have mastered it.
Mm-hmm. He, in the long dark tea time of his soul at Next, he learned like how a company should be structured to make that happen, and he actually had practice. He got to do a global company set up the way that he thought it should to make great things, and it's Pixar. People frequently forget about this, that before he went back to Apple, and as he was at Apple in the beginning, he also was the CEO of Pixar, which he bought for a song from George Lucas, who was in mad amounts of debt back in the late 1980s or something. And the history of Pixar is really interesting because they were not going to make movies. Pixar was making a computer that would help you make CGI. And Steve was like, no, we don't want to sell this. We want to use it and make, like, movies with it.
Isn't that interesting? Why in the world would he think that?
Well, because he bought Pixar for a song, and I think it was John Lasseter who was there, and John Lasseter wanted to make movies.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, John Lasseter's a genius, man.
Lasseter was sort of there, and he was working with the animation people, and there was no desire corporately to make movies or to make features of any kind, and John Lasseter really wanted to do that.
But Lasseter is a storyteller.
Right. And he sort of didn't really belong there. And it's kind of like Johnny Ive. Like Steve Jobs came back to Apple and he found Johnny Ive like 10 rungs down on the org chart, like in the basement of Apple with these amazing designs, which everyone was like, whatever, it's like the hardware guys put together a computer, Johnny put a nice looking box around it. And then you got this brilliant designer, making these beautiful things, and Steve Jobs goes down there and he's like, this is what we have to do. We have to take your designs and like make the whole company.
So that's what Steve did.
Yeah.
He found the people to do the work.
Yes, the ideas, it's like it's there. Every company, there's something there that you can do. You just have to find it and polish it over the course of years and decades, even. And that Steve Jobs was a polisher, and maybe that's the title of this podcast. Steve Jobs is a polisher. Please don't make it that. He learned how to. There's this quote from Horace Dediu from Asimco. He tweeted this a long time ago that. Pixar. Oh boy, I actually have to get the quote, otherwise I'll mess it up. Pixar.
Is John Lasseter? Is he now the head of Disney, or is that someone else from Pixar?
Someone else.
No, it's him. It's him.
It's him. Yeah. John Lasseter is brilliant. So Horace Dediu tweeted this tweet. Pixar developed a process to engineer art. Apple developed a process to make an art out of engineering. It's nice little two complementary sentences. But that's true. And Steve, I'm convinced, is one of the reasons why Pixar developed this process to always make a great product. And I sent this video to Shawn. It's Ed Catmull. He was one of the original founders of Pixar. He was like a boring software guy. He was not the storyteller. He talked about Pixar, and he talked about Toy Story and some of the early movies and all of the adversity that came out of that. And this is the one thing that could kill Apple, is that Steve and all the people working with him making these companies found out ways to reliably make good things, right? You generate all these ideas, you try them out, you don't compromise, you have the whole process of design is through the entire product management chain, right? That's why the supply chain is now so important. It's like, we need to take a design view of our supply chain because that's part of the product.
Yeah.
And they get that. The one thing that could kill them, and Ed Catmull talked about this. It's a great talk. I know it's an hour long, but people should watch it. Is that success?
This podcast is already over an hour long.
Right. I mean, if you're gonna listen to this whole
if you're gonna listen to this, listen to a guy who's really smart talk for an hour.
Yeah, it's a great talk. One of the main points of his talk is that success hides problems. One of the many examples he gave was when they started to work on Toy Story 2. One whole wing of Pixar wanted to quit. It was the I'm actually forgetting now. It was like the product managers. It was like the management of the team managers all wanted to quit because they felt like they were second-class citizens to the designers, to the engineers who were like making the movie. And when they looked into it, when Ed Catmull looked into it, he found out that they were basically second-class citizens, and and that the designers really treated them like crap, and that they suffered through it because Toy Story was this big, grand, history-making project, and that they were willing to be treated like crap to be part of a team that made the first fully CGI movie. But there was a problem there that they didn't identify because they were so successful.
Because they were doing so well.
Right, and then, so big success can hide problems. Things like, is the App Store's rules, the main reason for all the rules in the App Store is to protect the battery life of on iOS devices, to make sure that things can't kill your battery.
Which I will make no comment about how well that's working.
Right. So, regardless of any technical implementation failures from Apple, given a perfect world, they still know that the batteries on these devices, they're not huge. We have these kind of draconian rules. You can't do this, you can't do that, so that for multitasking or whatever, so that we can save the battery life. Is at some point maybe the App Store's rules, everyone's making so much money on the App Store that it's a huge success, and people are like, well, I don't really like these rules. They seem like kind of, BS rules to me, but I guess I'll do it anyway because this is where the money is. That if the locus of money making in, apps, or these small little software pieces of software, if it moves to Windows Phone 8 or something, because they've got this great new infrastructure and they've got an awesome product that everyone wants, and their App Store, it has less draconian rules, is that going to just be a knife in Apple because they were successful and they weren't thinking about that because everything's going great? There's lots of little things like that could be sitting at the heart of Apple that people aren't paying attention to right now. So that's I think that's where I'm going to end it.
Before we leave Apple and Steve Jobs, I will mention, I don't know, I didn't mention this to you, and I don't know if you know. Do you know that there is more than one project in development to make a biopic of Steve Jobs' life?
Yeah, there's the Sony one that Aaron Sorkin is going to write.
Okay, that's what I wondered if you knew.
Yeah, and then the Ashton Kutcher one, that's some indie thing.
Yeah. I just read about Aaron Sorkin 2 days ago, and I was like, oh, sweet.
I'm really excited.
He has access, unlike the indie one that's being made already, he will have access to all of the research that Walter Isaacson did, which means direct access to family and stuff.
Right, and also it's Aaron Sorkin. So I imagine that we're going to get a very interesting sliver of Steve Jobs' real life. It's going to be interesting.
Probably something very insightful and awesome, like The Social Network was.
Yeah, he's good at that. He should keep doing that.
He's writing a new show for HBO. I'm pretty excited to see when that starts.
If HBO should make HBO Go available to non-cable customers.
I know. It's not their fault. It's not their fault. I read about it. It's totally the cable networks. I'll link this in the link dump. We don't have to talk about it, but there's an article I just read about how cable companies are frenemies with Netflix and Hulu and stuff, because this guy, he was the CEO of, I want to say Comcast, but it was, okay, Time Warner. He said 40% of their customers are Netflix customers, and he doesn't want to piss them off. He does not want to try and infringe on them.
I don't know how all of the system is structured with cable TV, but if the Apple TV was some negotiated way for Apple to get content directly to you and bypass the cable networks, that's sort of the thing that I think that Apple would do.
Yeah. And it might be the sort of thing that Time Warner won't be happy about.
Right, and that's the thing that I don't understand thoroughly, is if it would even be possible for Apple to go and make a deal with HBO to get all of their content and put it on something that the Apple TV, this Apple TV, device would be.
Well, if Microsoft can't do it, I don't know why Apple would be able to.
I don't know. They got $100 billion. Apple can make things happen that other companies can't make happen. They'll talk to the record labels. Nobody thought you could do what Apple did with iTunes, and now that's the way people.
Including the Beatles.
Including the Beatles. Including the Beatles. That's another thing where it's like, no, like that's a Steve Jobs thing right there. They never would have. They might have had a press release about the Beatles, but they wouldn't have had like the big deal that Apple did, and that was simply because Steve Jobs really liked the Beatles.
Well, it was because they made a deal with Apple Records years ago that they would never get into the music industry, and then they did.
Apple can make things happen that other people can't make happen. I mean, it's like. And that's one of the things that I think this article mentioned this. That I guess we're not done with Apple. Is that the one thing that the biggest thing that Apple lost with Steve leaving was his negotiation, like his persuasiveness in negotiations. He could do things that no one else could do because he was Steve Jobs. Externally, to like record labels, to Google, to whomever. So I think that I don't think that's really going to hold him back because, well, as I said, $100 billion,
right?
Bigger than Exxon. But I'm sure that something is going to come up there. Oh, where's my water? Okay.
All right, we're gonna find out.
Oh my god, I can't believe you're doing it.
And I'm going straight to the source. I'm not gonna go consult something on the internet.
Right. Do you have the special edition or do you have a theatrical?
I have the theatrical edition.
See the one I want. Okay, fine. Let's find out. Let's find this out.
I really don't know.
Because it looks so much like a special edition thing.
I mean, it definitely could have been enhanced for the...
Yes, but that's why it's always hard to know. Like, was this in the original or wasn't it in the original? It looks fake.
All right, where do I think that is? This is no cave. Out with the garbage. All right.
Out with the garbage. With
Okay,
the rest.
I'm going to cut back in here.
Okay. I can't believe that. Okay. I love those scenes in the hallway. In the South Passage, where she expressed her true feelings for me.
I think you have to replug.
And before the carbon freezing scene, there actually is a moment where I think that...
Hold on. Audacity just stopped recording for no reason.
Oh, for the love of God, Michael Cera.
What the All right. Before I press record again, I'm exporting what we have.
Good one. Good call.
This is the podcast from hell.
Yeah, this is like, what's going on? Can't get a break.